Hello everybody, we're going to hit you up with another presidential election. This one, the election of 1828. John Quincy Adams going for that second term. Can he get it done? And there are two new parties on the horizon. Let's take a look at this election right now. Now, the Democratic Republicans have gone the way of the dodo bird, and two new parties come in to take its place. The National Republicans, which were Adams and Clay, the supporters of Adams and Clay, and Jackson Crawford supporters were known as the Democrats. And yes, this is the modern Democratic Party that we have today. The National Republicans will later on down the road become the Whigs. Speaking of that, the incoming party is the National Republicans. The incumbent president is John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts. His presidency does not go well for him, his first term anyway, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but he is renominated by the endorsement of state legislatures and partisan rallies. There are no nominating caucuses for either the Democrats or the National Republicans. Conventions won't come around until the next election, 1832. But nevertheless, John Quincy Adams is nominated for a second term as president, and John C. Calhoun, the incumbent vice president from South Carolina, is not going to run for his second term with Adams. And we'll talk about who he's going to run with in just a second. John Quincy Adams is going to bring along for the ride on his campaign Richard Rush, his Secretary of the Treasury from Pennsylvania, will be his running mate in this election. Now the Democrats. The Democrats forming from Jackson and Crawford supporters. Jackson supporters screaming bloody murder after this corrupt bargain in this election of 1824. Which saw John Quincy Adams get elected to the presidency, despite the fact that he didn't win the Electoral College or the popular vote by the House of Representatives, since no candidate got the majority of the votes. The Tennessee legislature renominated Andrew Jackson for president as the Democratic candidate. No nominating caucus was held for his nomination either. And John C. Calhoun is going to run with Andrew Jackson for his second term as vice president, and the Democrats accept his nomination. Now, John Quincy Adams doesn't have a pretty good presidency. He is basically dogged by this corrupt bargain with Henry Clay that decided the election of 1824 in the House of Representatives. John Quincy Adams comes into the presidency. He wants internal improvements. He wants a university to be established. He wants his government to be dedicated to the sciences and the education. But due to the political environment of the time, he doesn't get to do any of these things. So his presidency is left with few accomplishments. A notable thing of his presidency, though I'll get into for a little bit, was the Tariff of 1828. The Tariff of 1828 is also known as the Tariff of Abominations. It was passed earlier in 1828, and this increased tariff rates to above 60%. It had narrowly passed in the House, but it was unpopular with the southern states as they imported materials and goods from abroad. Jackson and the Democrats opposed the tariff, and the unpopularity of the bill led to a division of the vote into two main sections. Once again, this sectional divide coming up again, like it did in 1824. Adams had support in the North. Jackson had support in the South. Jackson also had support in the West. Remember, and tariffs would be a debate for years down the road. National Republicans versus Democrats, and then later Republicans versus Democrats. Democrats are opposed to protective tariff, were opposed to the protective tariffs. The National Republicans were for these protective tariffs, were for these internal improvements. Jackson was campaigning as a person for the common man. Voting rights were expanding by the time 1828 rolled around. Now you can be an ordinary white man at this point and vote, where before you had to be a white man who owned property in order to vote. As the 1800s wore on, the states gradually 86 these property requirements, and it shows in the turnout 57.6% of the electorate turned out to vote in this election, higher than any other election up to this point, because again, now you can be just an ordinary white man who's just living from payday to payday, so to speak, and you're able to exercise your right to vote. Obviously, if you're a woman or a slave, you still can't vote. But don't worry, African Americans and women, your time is going to come. But not yet. Alrighty. So going into the campaign here, sorry, that was a Snapchat message. Going into the campaign, it really wasn't about the issues of the day. It was a nasty campaign, probably one of the nastiest in American history, and it was characterized by a lot of mudslinging. Jackson and Adamson escaped the mudslinging that they were throwing at each other. The dirt that the Adams supporters had on Jackson was concerning his wife, Rachel. Rachel had married, and Andrew Jackson had married Rachel while she was still in the process of divorcing her first husband. Obviously, this marriage was bigamous in the eyes of the community, and when the divorce got finalized, Jackson and Rachel married again. And Jackson and Rachel both thought that nobody would bring this up, but come 1828, they did. And this would cause real big problems for Rachel, which we'll talk about in just a second. They were accusing a Jackson of living in sin, Rachel of being, committing bigamy. I mean, they weren't wrong. The allegations that the Adams camp had against Jackson were pretty much true. Also, Jackson came under heavy attack as a slave trader who bought and sold slaves and moved them about in defiance of modern standards or morality. He was not attacked, however, for just owning slaves that were used for working his plantation, the Hermitage in Tennessee. The Coffin Handbills, they attacked Jackson for his courts-martial, execution of deserters and massacres of Indian villages, and also his habit of dueling. Jackson was a person that put personal honor above all else. And if he did something that reflected on his honor, reflected on his integrity, if it was, bad about his wife and stuff like that, he would challenge you to a duel. And he had bullets left lodged in his body due to the amount of duels that he had been in. Now, Adams, he didn't exactly escape the lumps either. But the dirt that Jacksonians had on Adams wasn't all that truthful, but it was brought up anyway. It was charged that Adams, while serving as the minister to Russia, he had been an experienced diplomat just like his father was, had surrendered an American servant girl to the appetites of the Tsar. Adams was also accused of using public funds to buy gambling devices for the White House. Now, these so-called gambling devices turned out to merely just be a chess set and a pool table. So the allegations that the Jacksonians had against Adams weren't all that true, but the allegations that the Adams camp had against Jackson were actually true. And after this election and the results are already out, Jackson's wife Rachel is going to die. She's going to die in December of 1828 from a heart attack, and she accused the Adams, and Jackson would accuse the Adams campaign and Henry Clay in particular of causing her death. He said, "I can do and forgive all my enemies, but those vile wretches who have slandered her must look to God for mercy." In other words, he can forgive what the Adams camp was saying about him. He can take that, but he would never forgive the people that attacked his wife. And this would affect Jackson throughout his entire presidency. Speaking of that, let's get to the results. So Andrew Jackson is going to win this election. He's going to get his revenge from 1824. He's going to receive 178 electoral votes in 15 states. Adams is going to receive 83 electoral votes. He's going to carry 9 states, most of them in the Mid-Atlantic and in New England. Jackson's going to have support in New York and Pennsylvania. He's also going to have support in the West and in the South. In terms of the popular vote, 56% for Andrew Jackson, 43.6% for Adams. Adams won the same exact, almost the same exact states that his father did in 1800. And just like his father, he is going to lose out on his bid for a second term. Now, before we go here, a little fun fact here. When the results of the election were announced and that Jackson had won, a mob entered the White House and they ended up damaging the furniture and lights. Adams himself was in the White House when all this happened, and he escaped through the back door. And large punch bowls were set up to lure the crowd outside. So the crowd was lured out with these large punch bowls, and conservatives were horrified. And they held it up as a portent of terrible things to come from the first Democratic president. But at the end of the day, Jackson is elected. He's going to serve his first term. Will terrible things happen during Jackson's first term? We'll see that when we talk about the election of 1832 next time. I hope you all are having an excellent day. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, go on ahead and watch those. And with that, we will see you next time.